Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Jewish Divorce Project. I'm your host, Noam Rauscher.
And I'm your host, Leeron Tal.
Join us as we kvetch
and kvel about Judaism and divorce from our perspective as two Jewish professionals and two divorce coaches.
and two Jewish parents with lots of experience and plenty of opinions. So how you been?
Good. I'm 2 weeks out from this event, so I'm just in like crazy planning mode of all the last minute details and stuff. These
One
damn
thing to the
celebrities who can afford to buy tickets are like holding off, waiting to the last minute. Like, so it's just
How much are tickets to the thing?
a lot.
Yeah.
We're selling tables for like 25,000
Oh
and
my gosh.
10,000, and we lowered our individual ticket price to 1,000 a person instead of 2,500. It was just priced so high, and all the actors that commit, then they get a gig. Everybody's taking any job they can now after strike.
Right. This
Strike's
is all
really-
for the She Ready Foundation.
Yeah. But
What-
a lot, I mean, we have all of our partners and our donors and all those people, but because of Tiffany, there's a lot of talent and celebrities that want to come, but
Yeah.
it's just a really hard time. Fundraising in general is just really hard right now with everything going on in the world and everything with inflation and the election. It's just like
Yeah. Who wants
Nobody
to
wants
donate
to-
money?
nobody wants to donate money unless it's to Israel.
Right.
Or Gaza, wherever you sit. So
How are things going with the
Anyways.
coaching clients? Any fun stories?
pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had I've had a couple of new clients coming through, which is great. It's funny, man, my car magnet. I've been getting a lot of business from my
What
car
does your
magnet.
car magnet say?
I have a magnet that says, if you're looking for a sign, here it is.
Oh, I
And
think
then
I
it
saw
says
that
my
one.
divorce concierge. And like literally, I've had people call me, be like, oh my God, it's a sign. I saw your thing. So that's been kind of crazy.
What about other
Um,
signs, like for you coming out of the gym or coming out of Ralph's or something like that? Are other guys hitting on you still?
No, I've been working too hard right now. No one's been, I haven't been out and about much, which is fine.
Right.
I have my son graduating middle school this week.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Mazel
all
tov on
sorts
that.
of
That's
fun eighth
wonderful.
grade stuff going around that. My kids had football championships and one of them got to the championship. And how's your football team doing?
I wasn't around this past weekend because I had to travel for work. But I think they did okay. I mean, they had another doubleheader and we have another doubleheader coming up this weekend, so we'll see. We're like the bad news bears. We're ragtag. We're all heart. We're just not a lot of skill.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Kind of the way it
Well,
goes.
I don't know. My little one's team, they were all brand new. Somehow they were like the underdogs and they came through and they ended up being really good.
Oh,
They
that's
won
really
first
nice.
place in the division. And I think, the younger one got a big trophy and the older one has some in the room from last time and they didn't make it first place this time. So I think there was a little bit of an excitement there that little brother
Hey, I
got a
don't
bigger
know.
trophy.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to do anything like that for us. We weren't told. We weren't told like there was going to be a championship or a first place trophy or anything like that. That'll be a nice. We're not going to get it. We'll
Well,
get
I
the
was
we'll get the
really
good
ready.
sportsmanship trophy. That's for
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, this last week on Friday, I was literally there from 4 o'clock until 10 o'clock because both teams, they kept playing. Every time they won, they kept playing more and more. And now they're apparently going to Orange County. I'm like, I'm kind of ready for the season to be over.
You have to drive them to Orange County?
If they're going to participate now, apparently they go to they represent the region or whatever, and they get to compete now with like more teams.
Oh my
I didn't
gosh.
realize it was like all that. Yeah.
That's
So
big.
anyways,
lot.
and
There's
then
a lot of
we
business.
had Mother's Day.
How was
haven't
that?
talked-
Yeah. How was Mother's Day? What did you do?
It was,
you
I
have the
still have my
boy?
beautiful, look at my beautiful flowers I still have here.
Oh, lovely.
You know what?
The boys got those for you? Your ex got those for you?
No, not my ex. My mom sent them to me from the boys. But no, the boys were so cute. They asked me a couple days before Mother's Day during the week. I had them during the week, and they ran in the house after school and they grabbed their wallets and they're like, can you drop us off at that one store you like, that little store, Magnolia you like? We just have to see something. I was like, okay. So I drop them off at this little boutique, and they were in there with the store owner, like picking out stuff. And she, of course, I saw her a couple of days later, and she was like, oh my God, your boys, they bought me these earrings. They like went to the store that I like and bought me a gift. It was so sweet.
That's adorable.
Which I'm
That
not
really
even
is
big on
adorable.
gifts. But the biggest thing this year, I have to say, was the growth in my relationship with my ex.
Uh-huh.
I've always been like, Mother's Day is mine. I want them for the weekend, no matter what. You have them for Father's Day. This year it was his weekend. So, and it's their bonus mom's first Mother's Day
Hmm.
with their baby. And I knew that it was an exciting, the boys had hinted like, oh, it's her first Mother's Day, but I knew they would
Right.
never ask or anything.
Right.
So I just offered to my ex and I said, you know what? How about they spend the night? The tradition is every year the kids do breakfast in bed for me,
Hmm.
which is like me waking up early and having some weird breakfast in bed.
Right.
It's beautiful and it's lovely, but I offered and I said, how about they just stay the night and they wake up Sunday morning there and they get to celebrate her first Mother's Day with you guys and then just bring them over by noon and we'll do a different tradition. And I asked the boys and they were like, really? You're okay with that? And I was like, yeah, I said, it's her first Mother's Day. Maybe we don't need to do this every time, but I'm totally okay with that. And they were so happy. And he was so happy. And she wrote me this beautiful text about, thanking me for sharing my boys with her
My
and how
gosh.
how much she loves them. And I woke up Mother's Day and I was a little bit like, this is weird. First time in 14 years that I have not woken up with my kids on Mother's Day. And I was like, I went and gave myself a facial and I just like tried to just had my little morning to myself. And then they came over and it was really lovely. But I did for a minute was like sad. I missed them. And then I was like, why am I doing that? This is okay. This is new tradition. So it's about, being open to change. And everybody was really happy at the end of the day.
That's a real beautiful story. I mean, to know that you guys could kind of share that together, and there not be any tension involved, even if it was a little awkward at first or took some bravery. That's really beautiful. Nice.
Yeah. And
That's
that was
really
like a
beautiful.
couple of years ago, I would have been like, hell no.
I got my ex a big bouquet of flowers, and I had the boys make cards for her. So they took the time to really kind of make, like nice cards in which, they wrote notes. It wasn't just Happy Mother's
Yeah.
Day. It was a real nice note. So, and they had to dress it up a little bit, right? Color on it, put whatever it is, just dress it up. So it wasn't like a folded piece of paper.
That
Uh,
means the most.
right. So we ended up doing that, and I think it ended up being a success. That was very
So
nice.
here's the question. Have you been doing that every year all the time? Or is this something that kind of happened more developed lately have you always done that with them
My
since you
ex and
split
I
up?
needed to come to a real agreement of like what was an appropriate way to do this stuff. At one point it involved gifts and stuff like that. I think I got her like a bracelet making kit so she can make bracelets with the boys, a nice activity. Um, but I think getting to the place where we are now of the boys writing sincere cards and doing the flowers, I think that's probably seems to be kind of the ideal at this point. It's what works, and yeah.
Well, the fact that you're even involved in it and helping facilitate it is big. That's one thing that my boys haven't had really. Like he made sure they got gifts for her,
Mhm.
took care of her. So that was why they kind of like had me drop them off. But it's okay.
It's not easy navigating this stuff. I mean, co-parenting is a very difficult thing, and thank God we have really kind of healthy forms of co-parenting, even if there is some awkwardness or tension at times. Those are actually really normal. I think those are more often than not. There are a lot of people who have, healthy co-parenting, good co-parenting relationships that sometimes involve difficult conversations or tense conversations or some anxiety. And then there are some people who have very difficult co-parenting, even toxic co-parenting relationships, which we're going to hear from our guest momentarily, Ginger Gentile, who's going to talk to us all about parental alienation. And so I'm really excited for that. She's going to be a wonderful guest. Have you had any clients that have asked you about parental alienation yet or anything like that?
Yes. It's more like they don't realize that it is parental alienation when it's happening. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I don't understand this. How is
Mm,
this? Yeah, I actually not a client, but I unfortunately have a friend who went through a really awful thing where her ex like completely turned her daughter on her
mm,
to the point where she didn't live with her for a couple of years. And yeah, I've heard
right.
some really awful stories.
I first heard about the concept when I was becoming a divorce coach and just getting into the world of divorce coaching, and people were talking about it. And so it's really a fascinating concept. It's scary as well, and just to know that it happens and to be aware of it is actually a really smart thing. And so we're going to hear from Ginger. We're going to welcome her in, and we'll get this conversation going.
Great, looking forward to
All
it.
right, here we go.
Hi, let me just set my camera up because I have to put on switch camera. How's my audio?
Your audio is great.
Perfect. Okay. This should be, there we go. Let me adjust a little bit. Go. I used to be in film, so there we go. Now nice and warm. More saturation. No, that's too much. Little.
The
No, I
image
do.
looks fine.
You
Also,
look
I'm
great.
single. Do you use the video, right? Or not really?
Well, we don't really use the video. No, we use it for
Oh,
our conversation now, but we don't really publish with the video. At times we
oh,
were, but we have to figure that out again.
oh, well, I hope you do. I look great.
The
You
video
do
looks
look
very
great.
clear.
Thank you. So whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
Wonderful. So, Ginger Gentile, thank you for teaching
Yes,
us how to pronounce your name. Thank you. Otherwise,
of
we definitely
course.
would have gone with Gentile, which would have been a
Yeah,
fascinating conversation in of itself to be speaking with a Jewish woman whose
yeah.
last name is Gentile.
It's
Um,
actually it's a converso name.
is it really? No kidding.
So I'm Jewish from my mom's side, but when I moved to Argentina, I would make that joke and people would just look at me and they say, that's a Jewish last name.
Oh, no kidding.
Who
Wow.
else would have that name?
Oh, I didn't even, wow. Okay. Well, that's very cool.
I'm also in a city right now where 89% of the people are converso Jews from 500 years ago.
What city are you in?
Medellin, Colombia.
You're coming to us from Colombia right now? Oh my
Coming us
God.
from Colombia, yeah.
We've officially gone international in our
How
Push
conversation.
international, yeah.
This is
exciting.
Yeah.
wonderful. Ginger Gentile is here, everyone. All right, Ginger, I'm going to
Okay.
read your bio for
Uh-huh.
everyone, and then we're going to get into a lengthier
Sure.
conversation. Sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. So Ginger Gentile, the erased child whisperer, was a child caught in the middle of a bitter divorce and now helps parents facing similar battles find peace and even reunite their families via coaching designed for the worst case of parental alienation and estrangement. She's a documentary filmmaker activist who is on a mission to reverse parental alienation, a silent epidemic. Her documentary, Erasing Family, shows children suffering from alienation, reuniting them with their parents. Ginger's Ginger's extensive work in healing families has been featured on shows like Red Table Talk and Real Housewives of Orange County. She's also been featured on NBC and CBS, The Atlantic, spoken at South by Southwest, and on many other podcasts. She has reunited numerous families and leads the only coaching program that features ex-alienated kids as coaches using simple techniques to cure a complex problem. Welcome, Ginger Gentile. It's wonderful to have you on the Jewish Divorce Project. Thank you for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom with us today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you, Noam, and thank you, Leeron, for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. So nice to meet you.
I don't want to go too far into it, but I'm just kind of curious if you could tell us a little bit about your personal connection with divorce and what brought you to this position today.
Sure, that's a great question. So when I was 13, my parents got divorced and they had been living together for 2 years under the same roof during the divorce process to see who would get the house. And I was actually happy when the divorce was finalized, even though as a kid, of course, I didn't want my parents to get divorced, right?
Right.
And then things got worse, not better after the divorce. So both of my parents badmouthed the other parent, put the kids in the middle, and neither of them had the skills to deal with this situation. So that was my first exposure, was my own traumatic, unhappy childhood and teenagehood. And then to get away from my family, I moved as far away as I could to Argentina, a country that I have no connection to. Didn't speak Spanish, no family ties there. And I was living there. I ended up living there for 13 years. And halfway through, I met a man, Jewish, first language was Hebrew. You'd be happy to know. We got married. But the first thing he said to me when we met was, I'm very depressed. I haven't seen my daughter in 6 years. And like a lot of people, I was like, okay, I'm sure you have a bad lawyer. I'm sure this is nothing that we can't just go down to the courthouse and straighten it out. In that moment, I was working as a legal translator. And then I realized that this is not the lack of a good lawyer. This is a systematic problem where courts are all too happy all over the world to separate loving parents from their kids. That drove me to make a movie called Erasing Dad, Borrando Papa, which came out in Argentina in 2014. It was the first film censored in Argentina in democracy, which caused me to leave Argentina. And it was a whole thing. Like my phones got tapped because, you know, divorce is a big industry and it touches a lot of very sensitive cultural points. But the main point of the film that got a lot of people upset was I had professionals on there saying that their job was to remove fathers from the home because all fathers were bad.
As an Argentinian cultural principle in divorce?
That is not an Argentinian cultural principle at all. People were horrified. This is a worldwide principle now for some professionals. You know, all men are bad, all fathers are, you know, they all beat up their wives. In fact, we worked with I interviewed a Jewish organization called Shalom Bait, which were the non-Hebrew speakers against peace in the house. And all they did was this. They would just systematically whatever a woman would say was taken at face value as truth. And that's what made people very uncomfortable with the government uncomfortable with the film. People who watched the film were horrified by what these professionals were saying. We were just like, not all dads are bad. Isn't it good to have an involved dad post-divorce? And so when that film was over and it became like one of the most talked about films in Argentina, I moved back to the US. Oh, but first it actually caused laws to be changed. So after the film came out, joint custody was allowed in Argentina. Before it wasn't. And also they removed the gender bias in the law. So custody automatically didn't go to mothers. And I went back to the US. I was like, I want to make a follow-up film. And what I discovered in the US were two big differences. The first were a lot of mothers couldn't see their kids. And to this day, half of the population I work with are mothers who can't see their children. And then the other thing too is social media became a thing, which it's hard to remember before social media was a thing, but I could actually find children who are alienated to talk to. Because before, when I made my first film, how would you find kids if their parents can't talk to them? How are you going to interview children? And thanks to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, there wasn't TikTok back then, but kids put videos all the time saying, I can't see my brother, I can't see my sister, I can't see my mom, I can't see my family, making videos to the judge. And that's how the film Erasing Family was born. And it's from a children's point of view. So it's all about children healing their families. But unfortunately, these children, because of the trauma they've been through, don't have the skills to heal their families, nor should it be their job to heal generational trauma. So that's how I got into this. I'm not sure if there's any sticky point you want to talk about.
That's very helpful.
Summary. That is so impressive that you contributed to changing the laws in Argentina. You should be, I'm sure you're so proud.
Yeah, it was a crazy ride because when you're being attacked at the level that we were attacked, it wasn't, enjoyable at the time, but everybody wants to see a censored film. That was very helpful. And then when I came back to the US after Erasing Family came out, which, people listening, they can watch for free on YouTube, I became the executive director of the National Parents Organization, so involved in legislative reform in the US as well, to make shared parenting the default option. But I began to see that, so after the film came out, all these parents started to contact me, asking me if I could help them reunite with their kids. And at first I said, I don't do that. I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a coach. I'm not a therapist. And so many parents started asking me that I began to work with parents one-on-one to reunite, and then got more and more training. And now that's what I do full time. So I've moved out of the movie making business into the healing business.
Ginger, you mentioned Shalom Bayit before as being one of the
Mhm.
organizations that's there to kind of take fathers away. It should be said that Shalom Bayit is a organization that supports victims of domestic violence, whether that be children
Yes,
or, anyone who's a victim of
exactly.
domestic violence. So can you tell us
Not
how,
men.
right, right,
And
right.
not
And
in
then,
Argentina. So I only know the organization in Argentina.
okay.
I would invite people to watch Erasing Dad. It has English subtitles. And they're very clear. They say the importance of the father in the home is part of a nefarious folklore.
That the presence of the father
In the home is part of a nefarious folklore, like a myth that we tell each other.
right, right.
Children don't need fathers.
And a negative myth or something like that. That'd be very
Right.
interesting. I'd have to take a closer look at it. I don't know anything about that,
Yeah.
but that is really
Yeah.
interesting and
Oh,
disturbing
and
too.
one of them, the reason why it got censored is one of the women who I interviewed, her husband is a judge.
Mhm.
So this is why the film got censored. I didn't realize that she was married to one of the most important judges in Argentina. So so I think it's important to say that this is not an issue, or this ideology cuts across political lines, political parties, different religious groups. And they define peace in the home as no dad.
Mhm.
Right? That would be a peaceful home, because and one thing that I look at
Are you
violence as
suggesting though
circular.
are you suggesting though that a lot of those accusations that are being made through Shalom Bayit aren't essentially accurate or truthful in that way?
I would say that in Argentina, Shalom Bite does not investigate. When I made the film, which was in 2014, so that was about 10 years ago, they took what women would say at face value.
I see. Okay. And that would eventually lead to removing a father from the home.
Right, because then they'd go to court, provide women with free legal aid, but
I
there's
see.
no
Okay.
free legal aid for men. It's a very complex issue, but when we say that one group is always bad, it's very easy to create scapegoats.
Oh, sure. And it eventually
right,
becomes
yeah.
a cultural, well, like we were saying, a principle in some
Mhm.
way, or at least a way of understanding
Right.
things, right? That
But
like it's bad for kids to be
I've
with that.
never talked to people in the Shalom Bite in the United States, so I don't know what their connection is.
Okay.
But the film, it's all their interviews in their own words. And one thing I will say about Erasing Dad is we don't use any voiceover. We do not cut up their words. We let the people speak, and then people can make up their own mind. So everything that they said was of their own, was what they said. So it
Of
wasn't
their own
like, we
accord.
think it's bad, right?
Right.
It was like, it was just, they talk. Then, we would talk to another, we would interview someone else, but we don't sit there and say, this is what we think of what they said.
I hear you.
But this is why it got censored, because people are like, because when you say, well, maybe people who make accusations of domestic violence aren't always telling the truth. And in my world, I deal with the people who are often falsely accused of domestic violence, alcoholism, both men and women. And also I deal with people who were truthfully accused of something. And then I have to work with them to, show that they have changed and rebuilt their lives. So it cuts both ways. I always look at it as like, how do we heal generational trauma, as opposed to who is to blame and who should we shun from the family?
Sure.
I have a question. I think that just for our listeners, some people might not really understand exactly what constitutes as parental alienation. Sometimes people might be accused of that from
Right.
their partner, and they're like, but I'm just doing what's best for my child. Or
Right.
what would you say, really breaking it down on a very basic level,
Yeah.
constitutes for parental alienation? Because it's a negative term. Right. How could you kind of tap into
Sure.
that for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I define parental alienation is conditional love. When a parent loves a child conditionally and says, I will love you, I will protect you, I will give you resources if you do what I say and reject the other parent and their entire family. So what this causes in the child is not only to lose contact with a loving parent, but also contact with most of the time their entire half of their family. So they lose that connection with their roots. This can also, in some cases, be anti-Semitic. I've seen cases of that where somewhere, where if in mixed marriages, one parent will say that the other racial or ethnic identity is bad. In a racing family, we had a young woman whose father was Iranian, and the mother was like, all Iranians are terrorists, and then he's going to kidnap you, like, not without my daughter, and like put the fear of God in this young girl that her father was going to, kidnap her or something. So that can happen. And so my definition is a little different because I focus on the behaviors and not what the effect of the child is. So if you have a parent who's bad mouthing repeatedly and waging a campaign, that is parental alienation, but often this can be very, very subtle. Like, oh, don't go see your dad. If you go see your dad, mommy's all alone and sad. Do you feel safe with your dad? If you don't feel safe, you can tell me, sweetie, right? It's okay if you don't feel safe. So those little things can really influence a child, and what a child, and this is what I explain to all the parents who I work with. A child needs love to survive. We as adults don't. We can survive on our own. It's a little objectionable, but like, you have a job, you can clothe yourself, you can feed yourself, a child cannot. So when a parent says, I will stop loving you if you love the other parent, for that child, it's not just mommy won't love me, daddy won't love me. It's I'm going to starve to death. I'm going to have no house. I have no protection. So love to children is survival. This is how we've evolved. Gabor Mate, who survived the Holocaust, talks a lot about this, that children have to believe their parents are good people and go along with their parents for evolutionary purposes. So the child will internalize things. So I always say parental alienation is conditional love. It's a parent making their love conditional for a child, but also all the resources they give. Now, the good news is what's the cure for conditional love is for the parent who's being alienated to show up with unconditional love, to not get angry at the child, to not get angry at their ex, and to recognize that these are patterns of generational trauma that are playing out. So in a lot of the literature, it's like, who's to blame? And I'm like, no one's to blame. How do we solve this? How do we fix this so the kids don't repeat the patterns? Because what research has shown is that alienated kids, if they choose to get married and have kids, which a lot of them don't, half of them will become alienated and half will be alienators. And this will just repeat generation after generation after generation. So the parents who find themselves in this situation, they have the opportunity to become breakers of generational trauma. And I would say 95% of the parents I work with, they experienced this as a kid or in some version of their family. A lot of them will say they don't talk to their own parent or that their brother doesn't talk with their dad. And about 95% the alienator also suffered this. Every once in a while, I'll get a case where they swear to me up and down that they didn't experience this in their family. But those cases are rare. And in those cases, kind of like someone was so naive and innocent that they just went along with, the entrapment of the person who was alienating, because this correlates a lot with narcissism. It correlates a lot with high conflict behavior. So it's kind of like, well, if you leave me, I'll take what's most valuable to you, your children. Black and white thinking. So the people doing this, people often ask, well, why would somebody do this? And it's usually because they're replaying out their childhood trauma. In some cases, it is for revenge. In some cases, it is for money. But I always tell my parents, if it's for revenge or money, we're lucky because that means we're dealing with a rational actor who we can just appease or pay off. But when someone's replaying generational trauma,
right,
there's still good news, which is if your ex is crazy, crazy is predictable. So we can work with that.
But it's hard to manage is what you're saying, I think.
Well, it's like you can't deal with it rationally.
Right.
So what people often say is you're alienating. Here's some studies that show why you're doing will harm the child. And what the alienator says is, oh, you don't like that I'm alienating? It makes you sad? Oh, well, I'm going to alienate more. Because I'm getting what I want. I like to see you suffer. So what an alienated parent needs to do in that situation is to not show that they're suffering, to not beg to see their child.
Even though they probably desperately want to.
They desperately want to, right? So you have to be able to say like, okay, what else? Like, I'm showing up, but what else? Like
not
very
bothered by it.
detached from the situation, which is near to impossible if you're traumatized, because people who are going through a traumatic stress response, they're not able to be cool, calm, and collected. So the first thing we need to do is to get rid of the trauma response if the parent wants to cure this.
You said that it sounds like there are direct forms of alienation, right? That parent is bad, whether it's racist or just objectively untrue, right? There's a whole gamut of different ways that you could be directly, trying to alienate the other parent. And then it's somewhat of an indirect way of doing it, of saying kind of like, it'll impact me, the parent who's trying to do the alienation, right? The guilting the child into it, right? If you side with your father, you side with your mother, it'll hurt me in some way. And why would you want to do that? Are there other, though, techniques that people can notice or be aware of that aren't necessarily so emotional, but are physical in some way, or are pernicious in other ways that might not be obvious? Because I get like the emotional alienation part of it, right? At being kind of the root of it, like making the child uncomfortable in some way with that parent is how you alienate them at the core. But are there other things as well that are considered parental alienation?
Well, and I think I have a question that might go with Noam's, in that, if the child's really young, or if they're not really, I'm curious about it, because I wasn't even actually thinking about it so much about through the kids, which is so interesting what you're saying, that it's about kind of how you talk to the kids and get them kind of, in a sense, brainwashed almost, right?
Yeah, it's brainwashing.
But it could also be from just between the co-parents, right? It can be the way that that one parent is pushing away the other parent and not letting them be involved, or not letting them have access, or not,
of course,
being flexible, or all of those things, or trying to control what they're doing as a parent. That was where my mind was going about it. I wasn't even thinking about it through the kids, which is huge and damaging. But how have you seen that also through more of just?
Of course. So it usually starts off with some sort of restriction, like the parent not letting the other parent see the child. So, so this is called, not non-compliance with the custody order, which is, you see the kid on Tuesday, you show up to pick up the kid's not there. No one opens the door, right? Now, then the kid could be saying, I want to see daddy, I want to see mommy, but there's a block there, especially with younger children. Or they go to the school pickup and the parent picks them up beforehand. There's always a doctor's appointment. They move away without the court's permission. So that'd be one way to alienate. The most extreme form of this would be kidnapping, right? Child kidnapping, which most Amber Alerts are parents kidnapping their own children. People always say stranger danger. Most kidnapping cases are parents kidnapping their own kids, custody interference. So then, as to answer Noam, it's like an extreme example, but I've seen, if you see the other parent, I'll hit you. I'll take away your cell phone. I'll take your bed away so you'll sleep on the floor. For most kids, just taking away their cell phone is like death. And I've dealt with a lot of cases where the parent who's alienating snaps and throws the kid out, makes them homeless, and says, now you have no family. So that'd be, and that's an erasing family, where the protagonist, she's homeless at 16, living on the streets.
And so that parent didn't even send that child to the other parent?
Well, in erasing family, the dad had his rights taken away. So the daughter was adopted by the stepdad. So he's like, I couldn't even pick her up because that'd be kidnapping.
Right.
So you have these children who become, orphans. But in most cases, it's very subtle, because what custody interference, the way the courts think of it, and this is why alienation is tricky to deal with, is they think that one parent doesn't let the other parent see the kids. So then they call the kid in and they say, do you want to see dad? And the kid goes, of course I do. Mommy wasn't letting me. But if this has been going on for years and every day mommy says, daddy's bad, daddy abandoned us. Whenever you go see daddy, mommy gets sad. We're now best friends. You have to take care of mommy. Why don't you sleep in mommy's bed with me? Enmeshment. So a lot of these kids are emotionally enmeshed with their dads or their moms. Or for dads, often they'll put the daughter as the caretaker, right? She'll become like the wife. And I'm not talking about incest here. I'm talking about emotional enmeshment.
Right.
And then what also I think surprises a lot of people is it is easier to alienate a teenager than a young child. Because young children are unable to maintain lies for long periods of time. So this will be the classic, do you want to see daddy? I don't want to see daddy. Daddy's bad. You're sure you don't want to see daddy? No. Now that I said what I had to say, can I get candy? This falls apart very quickly with children. They get tripped up very easily. Now, a teenager, you say, if you don't see your dad, I'll give you a new car. And no rules at our house. Have over whoever you want, drink if you want. Your dad has tons of rules, right? He doesn't let you drink. I'll let you drink. So you see a lot of this with teenagers too. One parent saying, my house is the no rules house. And then the other parent tries to enforce a rule and the kid goes bananas. And they call the other parent and say, rescue me. They're not letting me use my cell phone because he caught me smoking weed. And these sound like extreme cases, but in the world that I deal with, all the cases are pretty extreme. I had a parent who's like, the dad let the kid use meth in the house. She became a meth addict. And these are upper class families.
Right.
So not when you think like meth head, like this
Right.
woman was a like psychologist and the daughter was doing meth in a mansion.
I'm sure there are extreme cases all over the place of things. How do you know, though, to tell the difference between, because there are always circumstances in divorce, in divorce and co-parenting where one parent is more lenient than the other parent, right? For any number of things.
Yeah, sure.
They're not as extreme as one parent's letting the kid have meth and the other one isn't.
Right.
Right. But how do you know what is actual parental alienation? Like how do you prove it in that case?
So what I do, which cuts through all this, is I don't try to prove it. Because what a lot of people do is they try to go through court to prove it. And I think that's a very difficult road. In all the parents I've worked with, I had one parent who had success with the courts in that way, which was after a long period of alienation, going to the court and prove it. It took him 19 interviews. So he spent 19 hours being interviewed by a psychologist. This took years. And then when the courts proved it, the mom moved away to a different state and he decided to stop fighting it. He now actually has a very good relationship with his sons. But I think that when we try to prove it, we get into a whole mess. So what I do is I work with the parent who comes to me saying they're alienated. Sometimes I tell them, you're not being alienated. Your kids don't want to see you, and there's a lot of reasons why. I still work with them. I work with whoever comes to me because what we're dealing with is learning new skills. So the skills I teach can be used in any situation. They can be used in low conflict divorce. They can be used in high conflict divorce. I use them every day. Whenever I write an email, I treat everybody as if they're a high conflict person. And people love my emails because they're short, sweet, and to the point. So what's beautiful about these methods and the methods I teach is it's not about proving, it's about healing, learning new skills, and then leading a life that attracts your kid back like a magnet.
So you're working with the parent that's been alienated, just so I'm clear, because so maybe I've been confused leading up to this point, but you're working with the parent who's been alienated to improve their relationship with their child. There's nothing for them to prove or anything like that via the court system.
No.
This is all relational.
It's all relational.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of the things you were,
No, just to correct, I did work with an alienated parent who was court ordered to work with me. So I will. But here's the thing, if you're the alienator, you're winning. Why would you have a coach? Because people often say, would you talk to people? I'm like, yeah, but they're winning. I tell people, like, I'll talk to your ex. They're not going to take a phone call with me.
But I have a question though about winning and being the one alienating, because you know the examples that you're sharing of why someone would alienate, and it's very much about you know, I'm the better parent, or I want, you know, it sounds like it's a lot of like anger and digging towards the other parent, right? Like, I want to win, I want the kids more. That sounds like a very narcissistic behavior, a very controlling person, all of those things. But what if the parent who is alienating is truly feeling like they're doing it because they don't feel that the other parent is capable or safe or healthy for their child to be around? Like, is that, do you have
what's considered reasonable boundaries? It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, is that still considered alienation? Is that still considered, I mean, if, you know, how is that?
Do they feel, okay, so here's the difference. Do they feel this way, or is it true? Because if they feel this way, that's their own trauma talking.
Well, that's where they work with that. See, a lot of the clients I work with mothers, I am then the one to say, you got to let that one go. That, you know,
right.
it's becoming having a shared custody. You know, sometimes, a lot of times you're maybe you don't have a good partnership. Maybe the way that both people parent is the reason you got divorced in the first place, or there's alcoholism, or there's,
I totally agree,
you know, whatever it is, emotional abuse, and you feel like, I got a divorce so I can get out of this, and now you're like, oh my God, I have to let my kids be alone with him. He may not be physically abusive, but it might not be a healthy environment or a good role model or a good living environment for your child. So that's a really fine line of like, I do have to sometimes point out and say, you can't control that situation, you know, like you have to let that one go. But that's where it gets tricky, I think, of like,
well, I'll give you an example with a client I worked with who came from the Orthodox frum community. And she had two kids. One, the older son was fully alienated. He was about 22, and the younger daughter would go back and forth. And she would write emails and messages to her ex-husband saying, remember to leave 15 minutes early because of traffic to the school. I said, you can't do that. So, well, he'll be late. I'm like, well, then it's his problem, your daughter's problem, right? So there's a lot of gray here. And one thing from being a child through this and having talked to so many children is that it's very gray. And what a lot of the adults want to say, and I still see this from a child's point of view, is parents want to say, I'm right, my ex is wrong. And kids, what they say is, I wish mommy and daddy would stop fighting. If they could just stop fighting just for a little bit, even so they could be at my graduation together, that'd be so nice. And when there's fighting going on, kids will often align with one parent. And that's also a way that the alienation can maintain. So I often tell parents, if you want to recover a relationship with your children, the fighting has to stop. But now getting back, and I'll talk about the woman who was court ordered to see me, who was alienating because the courts declared her, she was like, I've been declared the high conflict parent by the courts. And she'd say her kids would always come back and she'd sit them down and be like, do you feel safe with dad? If you don't feel safe with dad, that's okay. I'm here to tell you. And then and the kids never told her anything, but I'm like, do you think you're priming them to be emotionally weird around dad if you keep telling them that it's okay if they feel unsafe, right? Because the kids never came to them. So what I often say is like, if there is an issue of not being safe, like alcoholism, drug abuse, emotional abuse, that's serious. The dad's 15-minute late to school or doesn't make the lunches. So what a lot of people who are suffering from alienation will say is like, the other person's keeping me. I'm like, you're also joining this conflict. Like I work with a mom, she's being alienated, no doubt about that. But the kids go back and forth, and they've been fighting for 1 year over lunch boxes.
Like who buys the lunchbox and who maintains the lunchbox?
Oh, the kid forgot the lunchbox, so dad has to give it to me. And the dad is like, I don't want to spend time running a lunchbox over. And I had to work with her. I'm like, well, what's the worst thing that will happen? Well, my son won't have lunch. I'm like, is he a diabetic? No. So he'll learn not to forget his lunchbox after 1 day of school with no lunchbox. And the dad actually bought her 30 lunch boxes so she would not bother him. And then she said, you know, that guy, of course I donated them all. I was like, he was trying to stop arguing about the lunch boxes, right? So that's it's comical, but this type of stuff can happen. So with the parent who comes to me who's being alienated or who says they're being alienated, I say, even if this is only 3% your fault, we're going to work on your 3%. And then by working on your 3%, you'll get a different distinction. So I'll give you a story about a mom whose son was special needs. So this means even though the son was like 22, they were going to have a co-parenting relationship for the rest of his life because he was a guardian of both parents. They had joint decision making, which for all of you who want to do who are going through a divorce, joint decision making, if you're both high conflict, is the worst thing you can do in the world. I'm like, if you trust the other person to make good medical decisions and good educational decisions, like let one person have it. Because if not, how do you decide this? You're going back to court for years. And the dad didn't want to give the son medicine. And the mom's response was to get the doctor to say, if you don't give the son medicine, he's going to have all these medical conditions. And this was going on for years. And she's like, you won't give him the medicine. I was like, okay, why don't you try instead? As the father of our child, I totally value your opinion and your reasoning. Please walk me through your decision not to give our son medicine. I'm all ears, and I know I'm going to learn a lot from you. 2 days later, he said, I'll give the son medicine. And she said, once I started to give him, compliments, because he's grandiose, everything calmed down. Because it's not rational. So if you deal with it rationally of like, oh, let me have the doctor explain this to you. And I've dealt a lot of cases with like medicine being refused as a way to control things. So it can be subtle. So like in my house, my mom was a lot more like, your dad was in the military, so he was trained to kill. He never tried to hurt anybody, but it was like trained to kill, right? Like that was her indoctrination. I'm so lonely. I don't like when he shows up to pick you up. I feel like my house is being violated when he knocks on the door, this sort of stuff. And as a child, it wasn't like I was scared of my dad. I was like, you know what? It's so much easier if I just don't see my dad because I don't have to deal with this. And I've met a lot of kids in a racing family. I have a case of a young man who stopped seeing his mom because it was just easier not to see her. Because whenever she'd come to pick me up, it was a huge fight, a huge argument. My life was so much more peaceful with no mom.
Ginger,
so yeah.
That's all wonderful. I'm wondering, do you have any stories of success when you've been able to really kind of reunite children and parents together?
Yeah, so all the ones I mentioned, they were successful, but I can give some. So I'll give you the most extreme one, or do you want a more kind of normal one?
We'd love to hear that. Yeah, the extreme one sounds great.
One. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Extreme. This is an extreme reuniting of people.
Yes.
Okay.
So a dad comes to me and he hasn't been able to see his 13-year-old daughter for a year and a half because the mother got a restraining order against him. So he couldn't see the daughter because he had an argument with his daughter. Okay. The restraining order is going to expire. And he's like, I've been saving up my money. I'm going to go back to court and get visitation back. And I'm like, okay, you can do that at any point. Let's try a non-court solution first. Are you with me? He was like, okay, I'll give it a few months. Now, to add to this, the mom is a New York City police officer. Okay. She had tried to kill him twice, and the cops won't do anything because she's a police officer.
Oh my
okay.
God. Okay.
So I'm like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start, first we worked on his own anger issues, which he had because he was angry at the whole situation, right? Very unjust. She tried to kill him by running him off the road a few times, and he would call the police and like, we're not going to arrest one of our own. Okay.
Oh my.
So I'm like, okay, we're gonna start talking to her. So instead of demanding that you see your daughter, we're gonna start seeing what's the possibility here. So she doesn't feel that she's being cornered and attacked. So if she's cornered and attacked, she's gonna react, right? So he starts talking to her over text, and eventually he begins to have phone conversations with his daughter. Then we move up to meeting with his daughter, with the mom there. Then he was able to spend days with his daughter, and now he has overnights. And this is without any court order. This is by changing the dynamic with the mother and the daughter. And I have a lot of cases. So that'd be the most extreme, I would say. But I have quite a few cases where the parents have no contact with their kids. Because when you say success stories, I'm trying to think, okay, how much time do you got?
So that sounds pretty successful when you go from one
parent
trying to kill the other one as a form of alienation to now there being, sleepovers
Right.
possible. That's pretty big.
Well,
Yeah.
it seems like really the whole point is, like you said, you work on healing them. And I think that is it right there, because most of the time, the alienation has literally nothing to do with the kids or nothing to do. It's about an anger or a jealousy or a control or revenge or some sort of feelings that the person wants to do, basically wants to make the other person's life hell or wants to not let them get what they want, or they're angry, and that is, you have to heal that in order to move on in any way in a co-parenting relationship.
You're so right. Yeah. So I'm dealing with like these more extreme examples, but in a lot of cases, parents have not had any contact with their kids.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when they do this healing work, their kids will reach out to them.
Yeah.
And so I recently worked with a dad who was 5 years no contact with his son. And we worked with him to heal. He created a website for his son. His son was over 18 and his son reached out to him. And now they've had a few wonderful meetings. The son's going to spend the summer with him. I had a mom who one day the dad was like, I don't want you to see your daughter anymore. And the mother was so fixated on getting her time back. And I said, well, what about changing this dynamic? So your daughter, and focusing what your daughter needs from you right now. And your daughter doesn't need, why don't you see me? She needs to know that she can come back. And then we also worked with her to start showing up. So she started to go to doctor's appointments and show her daughter that she didn't have to fight with the ex and the stepmom, start going to school events. And she now has a good relationship with her daughter. So she went, in her own words, from having, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 with her daughter, level 1 relationship, to a 7. Now, here's what I found, and this is the word of caution that I have for people doing this, is that sometimes this can happen quickly, but sometimes there's a lot of work to do. And the steps I teach, I just renamed it. It's called the Revive method. And the first step is releasing the trauma response, because when you're in a trauma response, you repeat the same things over and over again. Then you're gonna, you're gonna identify the root cause of the alienation, what's causing the other person to alienate, but also what is your role in your family's history in this. You become a magnet that attracts your kids back, and then you start the communication skills. What most parents want to do is they want to know what the communication skills are right away. But also, which I think you were mentioning, Leeron, is that parents, moms can say, I'm being falsely accused of being alienated. And if the parents focus on skills and how to reduce conflict, it kind of doesn't matter what the accusation is. It's like, these are ways for the whole family to heal, because then the kids will learn these skills. But I'm in complete agreement that if someone is harming a child, they should have no to limited contact with that child. Right. So if someone's like getting drunk with the kids in the car and the other parent says, I don't want them to, be driving around with the parent. Of course, what I would say is the test that I often give is, parents who are very concerned will often say, I don't want this behavior to continue. And I don't want my kid to see the other parent while this behavior continues. I want them to get help. This is what I need to see to be at peace. And parents who are alienating often will say things like, so this is a common one. I think all parents should be able to see their kids, with one exception, my ex. And they won't give any really good reasons. Or they'll say this should be forever. There should be no contact. I should control everything. So there's a big difference between my kid is unsafe and this is what needs to happen to make them feel safe, versus, I think it'd be better if the stepdad became the new dad. And I've had parents reach out to me who've said, Ginger, I love the work you're doing. When I made my movie Erasing Family, I was raising money. I just made a donation. And I think every child deserves their parent, with one exception. That is my ex. So in those cases, I'm like, that sounds a little, weird, right?
What advice,
yeah,
Ginger, what advice would you give to a parent who felt like there was some alienation going on, right? Or, that there's any parent who's listening right now who feels like they've been alienated from their child. What kind of advice would you give them if you were standing on one foot, right? In our tradition, we have a way of saying, can you
Yeah.
summarize something briefly
Sure.
while standing on one foot, right, before you fall over? What would that be to a parent who feels like they've been alienated from their kid?
Wonderful. That's a great question. So the first thing is if you believe that you're being alienated or your ex is using tactics to ruin the relationship with your child, the first step is to realize you're not alone and to surround yourself by people who are healing and reuniting, not people who are complaining and saying that this is impossible. Find the coaches, the lawyers, the therapists who say there's a way out and not just wait or accept. That's the biggest mind shift. So many parents I see are hopeless. They're sad, they're depressed, and that depression in of itself will drive your kids away. When you emotionally heal, then work on the skills to reduce conflict while not becoming a doormat. Too many parents either fight fire with fire or they become doormats. So we need to learn a new way to communicate that may not be rational, but that will reduce the conflict, both with your kids and with the person doing the alienation. And if you follow these steps and you have accountability, they can work. They don't work if you don't do them. And so many parents will do them once and then say, this doesn't work. So especially if this has been going on for a long time, you need to apply them over and over again on a consistent basis. But the biggest one is not losing hope. So many parents come to me and say, my case is hopeless. I'm like, I just reunited a mom, 14 years, no contact. There's always hope. But if you say, my kid doesn't want to see me. So the first thing I do is say, I want to see my kid wants to see me. I love my kid loves me. And then really taking an inventory of anything you could have done that led into this. So maybe it's not that succinct, but focus on what you can do to be happier, healthier, healed, and learn new skills, and not trying to prove how bad the other parent is. I've seen parents who, the moment they say, you know what, I'm done trying to prove this, I accept the situation, I'm willing to heal, I'm willing to try something different, they'll reunite with 3 kids in one day because they give up I have to prove that I'm right.
Ginger, I can't thank you enough for your time and your wisdom. You've left us on a really positive note. I think there could be some really scary thoughts out there, notions out there about,
there's so much hope.
Right? What happens to my kids, right? If I'm being alienated from them, and will I ever be able to be connected to them again? What does that look like? And it's nice to be filled with hope in the sense of that it is possible, right? That there can be connection again. And thank you for sharing that. And I hope it's a wonderful and useful episode for our listeners.
Way. Thank you. Can I
Ginger,
share how people can reach me? Oh, yeah.
Yes. That's
that
what
was
we were
our
about
next
to ask.
question.
Oh, great. So
What's the best
easiest
way?
Yeah. So the easiest way for people to reach me is to go to reversingparentalalienation.com. reversingparentalalienation.com. On there, you can take a quick, free 25-minute class that walks you through my methodology. You can sign up for our group coaching program. Right now, I'm pretty full with one-on-ones, but I do have a wait list, so people can reach out for that too. And then on social media, we're at Erasing Family. That's on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and that's for the movie Erasing Family, which you can watch for free on YouTube. And to all the people out there, I do Facebook Lives. I do a lot of podcasts. I do not coach over email. So if you want me to help you, you need to get into one of my programs. And this is because I make sure I have all the information. But like, I'm not going to, if you ask me a question over email, how should I text my kid? I'm not going to answer that, because this also has to be a holistic solution. When people try to find piecemeal solutions, they often don't work. This really has to be a complete transformation of the parent. So you show up healed and a magnet that attracts your kids back. And miracles are possible. In my world, I see the worst cases. I also see miracles every day.
That's really beautiful. Ginger Gentile, thank you so much. Friends, if you have questions about parental alienation, reach out to Ginger Gentile. Ginger Gentile,
Yes.
You've heard her social media accessibility, as well as reversingparentalalienation.com and Erasing Family on social media. This has been wonderful. Thank you for your time, Ginger, and we wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
If you're interested in becoming one of our sponsors or have questions and thoughts about the podcast, please email us at thejewishdivorceproject@gmail.com.
And you can always find us on social media at the Jewish Divorce Project on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you'd like to work with me, I specialize in divorce coaching for women. I can be found at mydivorceconcierge.com and on Facebook and Instagram at mydivorceconcierge.
And if you're interested in working with me for divorce coaching or spiritual coaching, I work with people of all kinds, of all backgrounds as well. My email address is noamraucher@gmail.com. That's NOAMRAUCHER@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram at Noam Rauscher.